The hearing will come to order. Before the hearing officially begins, we have a few housekeeping notes. Even though right now nobody's participating remotely, we still want to make sure that the rules are set out and we have a full understanding. Those who are joining remotely must be visible on screen for the purposes of identity verification, establishing and maintaining a quorum, participating in the proceeding, and voting. Those members must continue to use the software platform video function while in attendance. Unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render them unable to participate on camera. If a member experiences technical difficulties, they should contact the committee staff for assistance. Video of members' participation will be broadcast in the room via television and internet feeds. Members participating remotely must seek recognition verbally and they are asked to mute their microphones when they are not speaking. Members who are participating remotely are reminded to keep the software platform's video function on the entire time they attend the proceedings. Members may leave and rejoin the proceeding. If members depart for a short while for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, they should leave the video function on. If members will be absent for a significant period or depart to join a different proceeding, they should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin if they return. Members may use the software platform's chat feature to communicate with the staff regarding technical or logistical support issues only. Finally, I have designated a committee staff member to, if necessary, mute unrecognized members' microphones to cancel any inadvertent background noise that may disrupt the proceedings. Now, we can begin. Today, Tactical Air and Land Subcommittee meets in a hybrid session to receive testimony from Army witnesses on the state of the nation's conventional ammunition production and efforts to modernize that process. The topic of today's hearing is intended to be a start, an assessment where we are. What I hope will be a productive conversation between the committee and the Army on improving the state of conventional ammunition production facilities across the country. The ammunition with our Army trains and takes into combat comes from production lines scattered across the great heartland of this nation. In fact, most of it's manufactured in the same facilities that produce the ammunition used to bring victories to the Allies in World War II. Shocking. To me, and certainly anybody listening, it's those facilities look, operate much like they did in the 40s. Producing ammunition is no easy task. Often it's a job that very careful and steady attention to detail. Obviously, the downsides are tremendous. You're dealing with explosives and chemical components. In order to ensure safety, security for the workforce, they must be supported with modern facilities that can do the job. The modern production processes are available. We need the will to assess and to do it. Many of the materials going in the ammunition production are foreign sourced or single sourced, or sometimes both. The supply chain disruption is unacceptable risk, and we can't do it. So why then, fundamentally, essential functions of the defense manufacturing done in museum-like conditions? What needs to be done is to improve this process. We'll have that discussion. How can Congress assist the Army in this task? And how would these facilities meet the need of a military in a true national emergency? These questions will be the focus of today's discussion. Today, we're pleased to have once again Dr. Bruce Jetty, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, as well as General Edward Daly, Commanding General of Army Materiel Command. We look forward to their observations, their ideas on how to modernize and improve reliability on the ammunition production. But first, I turn to my friend, Ranking Member for the TAL Subcommittee, Ms. Hartzer, for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Conventional ammunition and the associated industrial base have tended to be an afterthought at times when discussing the defense budget, and we've seen where ammunition procurement accounts have been used as bill payers in the past. There's a tendency to take for granted that we will always have a responsive and resilient ammunition industrial base capable of rapidly surging to meet operational demands. The COVID-19 pandemic has amplified a problem that has been prevalent for quite some time, that the defense industrial base, especially at the supply chain level, is fragile and may not be as resilient as we need it to be. This includes the Army Ammunition Industrial Base, where we see many single points of failure and supply chain dependency on overseas sources for many critical materials. So I'm very pleased the chairman is holding this hearing today so that we can better understand what actions the Army is taking as the single manager of conventional ammunition to modernize this critical industrial base. I want to work with you both to ensure we have a resilient ammunition industrial base that is modernized and affordable, as well as ensure we have a healthy stockpile that can serve as insurance for Army readiness and credible deterrence. Today, I plan to focus primarily on the status of the government-owned contractor-operated Army ammunition plants. There are 5 of these critical facilities that includes Lake City, located in Independence, Missouri. These plants are vital to nearly all munition programs, and most have been around, like the chairman said, since World War II, and many are considered to be single points of failure. Over the past 3 years, the Army budget request has averaged approximately $455.6 million per year to address modernization efforts for all 5 of these facilities. Despite this increase in steady-state funding, there still appears to be significant upgrades needed for manufacturing, safety, and environmental issues, among others. I'm wondering if there is a significant discrepancy between documented need and planned investment to sufficiently address all 5 facilities. And I expect our witnesses today to address this concern. So in closing, I want to thank our witnesses for their dedicated service to this nation, for your support of every soldier and each of their families. And I look forward to hearing your testimony, and I would add, in reading your biographies, I'm sure West Point is very proud of both of you. So thank you for your longtime service to this nation. I yield back.
Thank you. Interesting, in my district, directly across from downtown Philadelphia, the Delaware River, and we were home to 3 manufacturers from DuPont who made all the powders back during the Second World War. They've all long since shut, and they have a legacy issue there that is just millions to clean up. So we have to take care of what we have. Obviously, when they built buildings back in the 40s, they didn't know of many of the contamination issues that we're being faced with today, but it's also how we store it, how we transport it, the production. These are all things that we're looking to hear your views on. So I understand our witnesses have prepared a joint statement. Without objection, we'll make that part of the record. Also understand that the Army's request, General Daly will open with summary remarks. If we can keep it somewhere around 5 minutes, because I think we're still at 2 o'clock for votes.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Terrific. General Daly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the Army's Ammunition Organic Industrial Base, the OIB. On behalf of Secretary McCarthy and General McConville, thank you for your strong support and continued commitment to our soldiers, our Department of Army, civilians, families, and veterans. And I can tell you that I'm honored to be here today with Dr. Jetty. Today's ammunition OIB includes 16 plants, centers, and depots split between GO-GOs and GO-COs, down from the height of 64 locations during World War II, and with plans to decrease to 14 in the next few years. With a workforce of more than 11,000 skilled artisans, these sites produce, store, distribute, surveil, and demilitarize conventional ammunition for the Joint Force. As you know, the purpose of the ammunition OIB is to support current munitions readiness, maintain surge capacity and capability, and modernize to support future weapons platforms. And we are successfully meeting requirements in all 3 areas. Army senior leader priorities are clear. People are the centerpiece by which we achieve readiness, modernization, and reform. And unequivocally, our ammunition industrial base is tied to each of the Army priorities. I take my roles and responsibilities very seriously based on the command authorities given to me through Title X, by the Secretary of the Army, through Army regulations, which include distribution, storage, surveillance, DMIL, as well as mission command of depot infrastructure and energy and environmental programs across the ammunition OIB. My relationship with Dr. Jetty in support of his designated roles, both as the Army's acquisition executive and the senior manager for conventional ammunition, the SIMCA, is critical. Together, we work collaboratively on manufacturing and production. Dr. Jetty and I are 100% synchronized in support of the Army priorities and our roles and responsibilities and authorities. There is no daylight between us. As you will see in our 2020 SIMCA report, which will follow later this year, we have continued success in production and industrial-based management, stockpile management, and distribution management. With respect to the industrial-based modernization, we've made significant investments, more than $3.2 billion since 2009, in upgrades to facilities, infrastructure, and operations equipment. A few key examples include an investment of nearly $400 million in a new nitrocellulose facility at Radford, which is the base ingredient in the majority of DoD propellants, more than $200 million in a new nitric acid facility at Holston that recycles and reconstitutes critical materials used in insensitive munitions explosives, and at Lake City, upgrades for processes for primers, cartridges, and bullets with 21st century technology such as computer program logic, robotics, maintenance analytics, and prognostic sensors, and continuing planning for the new construction in support of the next generation squad weapon. The bottom line is that while these facilities are successfully meeting our current requirements, we must continue to invest in modernization now to ensure our ability to meet future large-scale combat operation requirements. Dr. Jetty and I are absolutely committed to a comprehensive, revolutionary, holistic 15-year modernization strategy across our ammunition plants and facilities. And although we've made significant progress in investments, we still have a $14 to $16 billion cost to fully modernize our ammunition OIB to a 21st century capability. We are refining our priorities that focus our modernization efforts on those projects that are most critical to support current readiness and posture capabilities for 2035 and beyond. Safety is one of our top priorities, and our envisioned end state is state-of-the-art manufacturing processes and machinery that have built-in safety standards across the ammunition industrial base. We're also committed to a protection of our critical capabilities and reducing our single points of failure, as well as decreasing reliance on foreign suppliers. Distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you again for allowing me to appear before you. Your continued support is enabling the Army to maintain and modernize our ammo facilities and deliver readiness to the Joint Force. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jetty.
Chairman Norcross, Ranking Member Hartzler, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, good afternoon. Thank you for your invitation to discuss the modernization of the Army's conventional ammunition production industrial base. I sincerely appreciate General Daly's opening remarks and am in complete agreement. I take very seriously the acquisition and logistics responsibilities of my job as ASALT. As such, I believe there is a real opportunity to better relate these two facets of this position within the Army ammunition enterprise. As General Daly has mentioned, today's Army ammunition production capability is comprised of a network of government-owned, contractor-operated GOCOs, government-owned, government-operated GOGOs, and contractor-owned, contractor-operated GOCOs ammunition sites. I'd like to focus my brief remarks on the challenges we face in the Army's GOCOs, ammunition production capability in the United States, related supply chain issues. Though, as General Daly mentioned, most of what I will talk about in the GOCO sense also applies in the GOGO sense. As you know, most of today's GOCO buildings and infrastructures were built and produced during World War II. And across many decades and administrations, the concept of modernizing these facilities has stayed within the limits of keeping production capabilities safe within specific established procedures and sustaining the operations within an existing footprint. This is understandable, as ammunition production is a dangerous endeavor, and the safety of our workforce has been and will continue to be our highest priority. I think that given that, we have been reticent to bring our production facilities into the 21st century. But we're at an inflection point, knowing that technology offers true modernization pathways that can significantly improve both safety and transform the production capability. Funding new facilities that are designed to embrace today's technology will improve workforce safety. enable environmental compliance, water, energy efficiency, conservation, and resiliency, and establish more efficient and effective production capacity, resulting in a greater return on investment. To that end, we have embarked on an aggressive endeavor to establish a new transformational vision to reset our modernization of the GOCOs. We must also address our reliance on foreign supply for many materials which support ammunition production, some of which are sourced from China, or locations that supply lines can be threatened by adversaries. As part of developing an updated GOCO modernization strategy, we are conducting in-depth analysis into sources of supply, assessing single points of failure, and determining whether it is our collective national interest to invest in secondary sources of supply, whether that be domestic production or through international partners or both. Mr. Chairman, General Daly and I are completely in sync on the need to shift our thinking on how we modernize the Army ammunition plants. Although it is difficult to modernize the ammunition industrial base while maintaining production continually to meet our current warfighter needs, there is greater risk in not doing so. There will be cost and regulatory implications we will need to navigate. This strategy will require sufficient, predictable, sustainable, and timely funding to ensure successful outcome, and we look forward to working with Congress to realize this vision. Thank you for your support of the Army and its Army ammunition industrial base for both our current investment as well as we transform to modernize for the future. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you. General, you mentioned something in your remarks that you were closing some facilities without even going into why you might be closing them. If we're looking at a single point of failure and we're narrowing where these facilities are by both number, doesn't that increase some of the risk?
Mr. Chairman, so there's two facilities, as you know, in particular that we're closing. One is based on BRAC, but we've looked at that. We don't think that based on the critical capabilities that reside in the organic industrial base that the closure of those facilities will affect our vulnerabilities or increase our vulnerabilities with regard to ammunition.
So is it the production capacity or the amount of stockpile material that is bigger issue?
So one of the locations that we're closing was not a production and manufacturing facility. It was just a storage facility, and it's in mothballs and has been for the last couple of years. The second one, based on BRAC, is related to chemical munitions stockpile reduction. And so once that mission is complete, that'll close in 2023.
So if you could just walk us through how you diffuse the risk when the production facility is there and the raw material, which some of it very hazardous and explosive. How do you diffuse that from that single point of failure? Because back in the 40s, some of the things that we were concerned about overhead are now readily available for those who might want to disrupt it. Yeah. With stockpiles, foreign material, how do you address that?
So, Mr. Chairman, let me address some of the single point of failures. There are risks of concentrating particular production at a particular facility in a single facility alone. Holston, for example, is a primary place where we produce most of our explosives used in bombs and other similar things. The facility itself is designed in such a manner that the production lines are tolerant. If one is damaged and incapable of producing, other lines can pick up some of the load, and there is enough space to produce additional lines at that facility. It still does have all of the production capability concentrated in one place. We have a similar issue for propellant, which is the material that goes into bullets and ultimately also into rocket engines and motors. So Radford, Holston, those two plants in particular are single points of failure if they were to be limited in some capacity. But the historic approach has been to save money overall in the defense industrial base and reduce the number of places As we said, from World War II, there were 70-some facilities, and now we're down to 14. The only way to get around that is to return other places to production, and in that case, we're not going to be necessarily as economical as we are trying to be right now to keep our production numbers up.
So you talked about $3.2 billion as your capital plan moving forward. I'm not sure how many years. I assume that means there was an assessment done across the board. What year was the last assessment made that you're driving the plan off of?
So, Mr. Chairman, the base plan is the United States Army Ammunition Industrial Base Strategic Plan 2025. It was published in February of 2016. As the plan's fundamental approach to the problem is to take a look at the production requirements of the Department of Defense, what the responsibilities are of those facilities, and then to try and make sure that those facilities stay, number one, safe, because capabilities go downhill. We do find that there are procedures that are not as safe as we think they should be. We should fix those. So there are various things we do to make the plants better, but we don't deviate a great deal from the methodologies we've used in the past. So we're just improving what we've been doing essentially since World War II in those plants. That's the plan. That's the one we're working to. That's the one that's palmed. What we've done in this past year is take a more reflective view of things. And I know I've had an opportunity to talk separately to a number of your staff after some visits to those facilities and say, we have technologies which are not part of improvements. For example, right now people still handle munitions by hand, whereas we can use robotics and automation and other methodologies to handle them. We can get people separated from the explosives. They're doing it safely. We're improving the safety conditions by those methods, but we have the technology to get them out of the facilities. So the question then becomes, how do we improve the plants in such a way that it becomes more dependable, more reliable, and above all, safer for the operations by the people who can transform from handlers of munitions to technicians at the facilities?
Thank you. Just one comment, and then we'll turn it over to Ms. Hartzler. The idea of making it safer for the workers, there's no question about that. But because these plants have grown up since the 40s, they have a great relationship with you eliminate many of those jobs, there's a potential of that support also going there. Mrs. Hartzler.
Sure. Well, surge capacity is very, very important, and I know it's tricky as you manage the ammunition plants because you have to have the capability to surge, but at the same time, you may not need it all the time. And so I guess my first question is, what actions are you taking to improve the surge capacity and resiliency of the ammunition production industrial base? And then secondly, can you walk us through the extent to which the industrial base is dependent on overseas sources for ammunition material? You mentioned in your opening remarks that you're currently doing an assessment to look at the vulnerabilities. We were provided with some slides ahead of time. This is just showing in China all the different chemicals and source items that originate and how they're used in various aspects of ammunition production. So if you could kind of expound on where you're at in that assessment and when you think you will be able to make those decisions and secure those secondary sources for those. And just in your testimony, written testimony, twice you mentioned at the same time we must implement a strategy to reduce single point failures, reduce dependence on international sole source suppliers, some of which are not our allies, and develop international partnerships. So I guess my question is, along with this, is there a strategy? Are you in the process of just kind of assessing things and then you're going to write the strategy? So thank you.
Let's see if I can get this in before my clock stops. So the first question about surge production. The largest challenge to surge production that we've had so far and recently was because the Air Force, in its engagements with ISIS, used quite a few more bombs they've had. So the first place we went is the Air Force uses something called AFX in the bombs. It's a form of RDX. RDX is produced at Halston. And we had a capability to do 8 million pounds of it. And what we realized is that was our surge level, and really now our surge level is 15 million pounds. So we have invested a significant amount of money to increase that facility and be able to bring that production capability up to the 15 million pounds. To compensate for that, rather than impact the operational capabilities, we want to keep the RDX in the bombs that the Air Force is using. It's a safer munition. You can also use TNT. TNT and RDX are similar performers. The problem is TNT is not as safe in operation as is RDX. So the TNT is used in a more benign training environments now. So the bombs, we mitigate the quantity problem right now by the use of TNT as a substitute for training bombs, and we use the RDX for the actual operational materials. So it gives us a breather. We haven't missed any of our production requirements, and we're continuing to meet the Air Force needs and the operational needs. For overseas sources, I'd like to offer an opportunity, if possible, with the committee to have a classified discussion separately on some of the details of that, because I really think that some of those details probably should not be discussed in open forum. But on the other hand, I will tell you that we have detailed analysis down to sub-suppliers, 4 and 5 layers in some cases, knowing exactly where all of the components for our munitions are coming from. It's really impressive how good the ammunition enterprise has gotten into trying to work this. However, that's fine, but we've got 2 paths forward that we're working on for these unique materials. And one of them is alternatives. So I'll give you a simple example. Lead-based primers. Primers are used to cause the detonation of the rounds. Lead was in the primers. It's not much. They're small. You fire a gun. You're in close proximity. You have lead in the vaporous air. You're inhaling lead dust. So for health reasons and various other reasons, we decided we wanted to get away from lead-based primers and find an alternative. So Picatinny did extensive work and is continuing to do work on alternatives to lead-based primers so that we can still accomplish the same purpose as the primer, but without using the same materials. What we're doing is trying to take a look to the list that you have in front of you and others. We're trying to do the same thing by having the people who are the experts in the chemistry and the objectives of the given chemistry we use find alternative methodologies to achieve the same outcome. And then make sure that that's done with materials that we can source from the United States. A second approach is that some of the materials can be sourced in the United States. It's a rather lengthy discussion we should have about the challenges of producing materials. DNAN is a fundamental component to the artillery shells. We don't source any of it in the United States. And we could, but we're not set up to do that right now. It would take a decision to go in that path to make sure that we can transition to it. Let me hit the last one real quickly, the single point of failure worldwide. So we've got two approaches to this that we're taking. The fundamental approach is that I've asked the Program Executive Office to work with all of the DoD staff and AMC in particular on alternative sources worldwide. So take a map, look at where we may have challenges if we had to deploy forces, determine what other ammunition sources of various types and calibers that we might be able to find, because ammunition is sourced elsewhere in the world by other forces and would work well with our munitions. the requirements. The problem is we don't have contracts in place for small quantities where we can hold those potential alternative manufacturing facilities accountable for the quality standards that we want on our munitions. So I've got the PEO mapping that out right now so that it comes to current, real, full-up rounds, artillery shells, bullets, bombs, et cetera. The second thing is that we're looking at those single points of failure and determining how we can find alternative sourcing methodologies here in the United States and what it will take. And I think that that's part of this transition plan, transformational plan, is to generate an ability to produce some of these chemicals which are not being produced in the United States. And this is where in my opening comments, I said it'll take financial decision-making and regulatory decision-making. There's a balance. Most of the reasons we don't make them have to do with regulatory requirements that make it very onerous, and the financials that it would take to be able to produce them here in the United States.
Great, thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Carbajal?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Yeti, in your testimony, you state that over 80% of Army Class A mishaps involving a fatality or property damage greater than $2.5 million are the result of human error. What trends have you identified that contribute to these errors? And while I understand there are long-term solutions that include automation, in terms of automating the handling of dangerous materials, what short-term steps are being taken to address these errors?
This is one of the most important areas I think that we really need to address, is making sure that we take all the possibility of human error out of the equation. As I said, we're essentially making the explosives in a manner very much like we did in World War I, World War II in some cases, World War I in some cases, World War II in others. We literally have people standing on their machines that are full of 1,500 pounds of molten explosive, drooling it into artillery shells to fill them up, and then they push the carts out of the way. We don't have automation, we don't have robotic systems. The people have developed, and the Ammunition Safety Board have developed methodologies, tactics, techniques, and procedures to make sure that it is done as safely as possible under those given design considerations. We do consistent and continuous reviews of those processes and procedures. It doesn't mean that there's not an unforeseen problem that we couldn't encounter that could cause injury or death. The vast majority of, and I went back to see exactly, asked my staff, tell me exactly what we got a number. We had 13 people injured at Radford last year. What does that mean? Because, I mean, it could be anything from a slip and fall to a serious injury that didn't cost a life, but what was close. The vast majority of the injuries tend to be standard industrial injuries. I'm not diminishing that we need to improve that, trips, falls, et cetera. That's part of the old facilities that we have that make it difficult to avoid those things. The second piece is we have been, I think, while not good enough, consistently fairly good in trying to make sure that we don't have any deaths in the facilities. We have had 3 deaths on all of our facilities in the last 10 years. One was due to, there was a backhoe operator who was working in a pond for the Department of Energy that happened to be on our facility. He somehow turned the backhoe upside down on himself and he drowned. Didn't have anything to do with the operation of the plant. The other 2, one had to do with clearing a vessel, because we do these melt batch systems. He was clearing a vessel with a wooden paddle, which had been done for years, and it detonated.
Dr. Yeti, I do appreciate the level of detail you're giving me. I'm going to delve into my second question. because I have limited time.
Okay.
The ongoing challenge facing government-owned contractor-operated Army munition plants, also known as GOGOs, is that the specialized workforce is aging. This challenge is not new or unique to ammunition production as we see it affecting shipyards and maintenance across the department. Dr. Yeti, how do we better recruit the future specialized workforce? How are we connecting with technical schools that produce the men and women who have the needed specialized skill set?
So let me pass, if I could. The GOGOs are fundamentally operated by General Daly, so if I could pass to him.
Congressman, thank you for that question. First of all, I have to tell you that we appreciate Congress's support in terms of direct hire authorities. Quite frankly, that has been a game changer in terms of bringing younger, skilled workers into the workforce to posture for the future. In terms of as we modernize, the skill sets will migrate to more technical in nature. So there won't be a reduction in workforce, but it'll be a change in the skill sets. An artisan workforce that, quite frankly, was much more manual labor, and based on the investments that we have made, to your point about safety, we have made some significant investments. We continue to do so. But robotics, computer program logic, sensors, et cetera, will change the skill set that we need. I feel very, very comfortable that we have the authorities, and we're starting to look at partnerships with industry, partnership with academia, to get interns in, to hire them so that they can be with us for decades to come, and it'll reduce the average age of the workforce.
Thank you, General. I yield back.
Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate both of you being here today. My first question, I got to try to do 4 quick questions here, but for General Daly. Understand, we have this World War II ammo production, infrastructure. What does a modernized infrastructure here look like to you?
Congressman, thank you so much for that question. Quite frankly, what we've done to this point, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, we've made significant investments, but quite frankly, I think in terms of revolutionary change to make them 21st century, what I would envision, and we've done some of this, but it's been more discrete than holistic, and that's really computer program logic, it's robotics, it's maintenance analytics and predictive sensors on equipment, so we know when that equipment is going down, continuous process management to get it quality. In addition, plant layout and design, as Dr. Jetty mentioned earlier, all that in my mind leads to improved quality, increased production capability to get it to surge point that Ranking Member Hartzler talked about, and then also safety of the workforce.
Thank you. I appreciate you putting a little meat on the bones there. And Dr. Yeti, you talked a little bit already with Ms. Hartzler on how China has some of these critical materials for our ammo production. How hard is it going to be to diversify to ensure that our supply base doesn't run strictly through China?
Sir, we're in the throes of trying to see what it would take to be able to wean ourselves from all of the materials. The materials that we do get from China are not large volume materials. For example, the DNAN I spoke of earlier, we get millions of pounds of that. That tends to come from India, not China. However, there are small materials in detonators and in smoke, pyrotechnics, these type of things. In some cases, the sourcing is because that's where God put the stuff. And so we don't dig much of it up here. They dig it up over there. We have to bring it here, or we have to find an alternative. And to this point, the price model has said there's no reason to do this research. This is one reason why I think we need some degree of a revitalization of our research and development activities, specifically with respect to our energetics and our pyrotechnics. That's not the nice solid answer of giving you, I got it down in 5 years. We're having to chip through each one of these and look at these. Is it just, can I source it somewhere else? Why don't we produce it here? That generally is because of facilities that don't exist, or because it's going to be so expensive to meet the pollution abatement requirements that it's unaffordable at the prices I can currently get it from overseas sources. So we're having to work through those issues. in all of them.
Well, we're glad you're digging through it because it's an important question. We don't want to be dependent there in a time of crisis. What's your mindset on depleted uranium? It's very important for some of our MOs. Are there smart alternatives, or is this the best alternative?
So I'm deviating a little bit. It's a little bit outside of the ammunition per se, but I do understand. Being a material scientist, I understand a bit about depleted uranium, and if you really want to go into deep detail, we probably need to go to a different setting as well. Uranium is a hard material. Crystalline structure makes it very strong. It's a high temperature material, so it's very good as a long rod penetrating a lot of mass. You can get a lot of energy in that rod when it hits a target and gets a great deal of penetration. At the same time, it's got toxicity issues. Radiation is generally not a really relevant issue with depleted uranium. You've removed the radioactive components from it, though it is to a minor degree present. Tungsten and some other refractory materials provide similar capability, and we've been looking at how we can employ those in an alternative fashion to them. We've sort of started there, came over to DU, and now we're sort of looking back again at those, and we can probably give you a little bit more detailed discussion in a different forum.
Okay, we'll come back to you. It's an interesting subject. It's going to be hard to get this in 30 seconds, but I'll give it a quick stab. I know we're trying to put as much lethality on an individual warfighter that we can. Do we have the requirements for the individual assault munition solidified? So pretty much having a better weapon for a single soldier shoulder fired. Have we solidified those requirements?
To give you a clean answer, I'm going to come back to you with a one for the record. I don't believe that there's been a significant change to the requirement as I know it right now, and I'll just have to check on that.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. So in your written testimony, you say that to fully modernize, improve, upgrade technology, et cetera, between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 35, it'd be roughly $14 to $16 billion. Back of the envelope, that's about $1 billion a year. You mentioned earlier in your testimony today that I think a strategy was outlined in 2016. What has been the annual appropriation, authorization and appropriation for ammunition modernization to date, or at least since 2016 to date, roughly?
Congressman, to this point, what's been appropriated from 2016 to now, between both the GO-GOs and GO-COs, it's been just under $2 billion.
Under $2 billion, 4 years, so considerably less than the $1 billion per year. Now, has that appropriation, has that been, and to your knowledge, above, the same, or below the president's budget request?
So, Congressman, quite frankly, that's been right about what we've asked for in the president's budget. When we talk about the $14 to $16 billion going forward, as Dr. Jetty mentioned, we're in the process of refining that to focus on the most critical projects that will yield the effects in the organic industrial base and bring them into the 21st century. And as mentioned earlier, that focus on reducing the vulnerabilities at our single points of failure, and quite frankly, also at improving the capabilities that are unique to the organic industrial base. So I see that number refining over time, but that just gives you a ballpark on what it had been as we take this new approach. Don't necessarily think it's going to be more expensive. I think it's more a case of a focused and investment strategy that we'll bring forward through the Army leadership into the president's budget.
Focused, a little bit more expensive than what we've been paying to date, and I get it. But let me ask you this question. So, I'm hearing about technological, so incorporating better technology into the plants. Sounds like there's some facility in terms of realty upgrades. I'm assuming there's some workforce training that goes with that. So can you briefly describe to the committee, I see two of the three sort of critical players here, and the other one being the Assistant Secretary for Installations, Environment, and Energy. Can you just briefly describe to us how you work together to develop that master plan, that modernization strategy?
So Congressman, great question. I will tell you that not only is there a great linkage between Dr. Jetty and I, but also there's an inextricable link between the both of us and Honorable Beeler in his role as the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Installations, Energy, and Environment. And quite frankly, Honorable Beeler is in the process of working an Army-wide installation strategy for the future that tackles energy, environmental programs. When you juxtapose what we're trying to do with the organic industrial base with what he's doing, that'll be linked in. And the great thing, quite frankly, is that the Army senior leaders have given to Dr. Jetty, myself, and Honorable Beeler the funding stream recommendations to them on how we move forward in this holistic approach. So it's not just on facilitization of the organic industrial base, it's really focused on this piece, like you mentioned, protection, energy, environment, et cetera.
And let me just, with the last minute and 20, and maybe it's picking up where Representative Bacon left off, but I think about the Army modernization priorities under the Futures Command, and particularly, or specifically, I think about long-range precision fires and soldier lethality, the new next-generation squad weapon. Are any of the activities in those lanes influencing what you need to do in the ammunition modernization strategy?
Yes, sir. So let's take the last example that you raised. We've got next generation squad weapon, next generation soldier weapon. Caliber is going to be 6.8. We don't produce 6.8 right now, so we're going to have a facility to be able to produce 6.8 caliber munitions. There are 3 vendors that are competing. 2 of the vendors have a polymer case. One vendor is a brass case, as we currently produce. So, keeping my acquisition hat on here, I'm not choosing anything, but if it's the brass case, for example, we have Lake City has the facilities already capable. We retool them, and we could have one line producing 6.8 in a few months. If one of the polymer cases take place, what we're likely going to do is use their facilities to produce our interim supplies while we develop an in-house production capabilities, and they become an ability for surge at a later date. But it will require retooling and, frankly, refacilitization, for which we have put in our POM funding to this point. So we are working towards it, just waiting for the solution.
And I assume for long-range precision fires, we'll take that up in a classified setting.
Yes, sir. In some aspects of it, it's very much the issue of the fillers. But again, it goes back to if I've got to go farther, I tend to have less filler. If I have to go with less filler, can I move to a more energetic material as a filler? And we're still working those issues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Just a follow-up clarification. Retooling's difficult, but it's cut and dry. Are the base materials changing? So if you're looking at stockpiling, that would change the formula and then expirations. Okay. Mr. Whitten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Jett, General Daly, thanks so much for joining us. I wanted to refer to a lot of the work the committee's done on the small multi-purpose equipment transport, better known as SMET. We know these robotic mules can do a lot to help folks in the infantry. We know, too, as we're asking our soldiers in the infantry to do a lot, we're asking them to carry particularly heavy loads, lots of equipment. We know the biggest weight component of that is ammunition, and we know of the ammunition component, brass makes up a really, really big part of that. I do know that the Army's had a lightweight ammunition requirement for about 40 years, and it hasn't gotten any lighter. So I understand there's a lot of strides that have been made in polymer-cased ammunition. In fact, I've had the opportunity to shoot some both here in the range in Rayburn and then elsewhere. Pretty amazing ammunition. This 30% reduction, I think, goes a long way to increase mobility and the flexibility that folks in the infantry have. Dr. Jett, could you provide us an update on where the Army is in filling this requirement, and how far out do you think we are from fielding the next generation ammunition? And is the polymer-cased ammunition the direction that you believe things are going based on the technology and the research?
So let me touch the last one, the last question first, so that I stay out of trouble on the first set. Because it's an ongoing acquisition, I'd prefer not to interject my personal opinion as to which way might be a better way to go. What I can do is I can describe the circumstances around this, and it's a great question. I will tell you that I was a tanker for 28 years in the Army. I spent 2.5 years in Afghanistan and Iraq while in uniform, and I never was on a tank. I had to walk everywhere. And I really have a great sympathy for infantrymen and all the stuff they have to carry. At one point, I was also the program executive officer for PM at the time, but the PEO, what is now PEO soldier. So I had all of those uniforms, guns, equipment, et cetera. It has been my objective to try and find a way to lighten that soldier's load from the very beginning. If I have my basic load, it's 220 rounds. I fire those rounds, I have 11 pounds of debris at my feet. Yeah. That means in order to get 220 rounds worth of munitions downrange, I've got only 2 pounds of it is effective munitions. The rest of it's packaging.
Right.
It has been a significant problem because with trying to find an alternative that has been acceptable in all environments. It's got to be able to withstand cold. It's got to be able to withstand shock. It has to be able to, when cold, getting dropped, does it crack? Things like this. When it tries to get jammed into a gun, does it crack open? And if it doesn't get in there just exactly right. So there are real issues with trying to go to polymer casing, but where it was when in 1998, when I was the PM for all of these systems, is different than where it is today. Yeah. So I do believe that we are making significant headway in having alternatives to brass casings alone. Right. Reducing that by 1/3, frankly, my experience with infantrymen means that they'll add 1/3 more ammo. And I believe that this goes exactly to my issue about trying to enhance our ability in our research and development aspect of things, because I think that polymer casings may be an intermediate state in going to perhaps even caseless ammunition.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's a great point. We've had a chance to look at both the polymer case, the caseless ammo, obviously a lot of development areas there. Let me ask this. We currently, in producing ammo as it stands today, we have government-owned, government-operated facilities, government-owned, commercially operated facilities. If we were to transition to the next generation of ammo, a lighter ammo, obviously a massive change in manufacturing in the large scale, tell me, what would the effects be in transitioning that? Will we have a proper transition to make sure that the industrial capacity there that we have, that we need, that we've heard about, can be maintained in transition to this new technology?
Yes, sir. The critical aspect of being able to go to an alternative structure, polymer case, that type of thing, is tied up into the IP. These companies develop them on their own nickel. They own the IP. They'll have production facilities, and we'll be able to buy from those production facilities as well, because they'll probably extend them into the commercial marketplace. But the other side of things is that as part of our solicitations, nailing down the ability to use that IP in our own facilities and them assisting us in facilitating those facilities is essential.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you both for being here today. Just to take it back a step, as we're talking about all the money we're going to spend on modernization, we're talking about government-owned, contractor-operated facilities. So I'm wondering what the trade-offs are of having an industrial base that's in an industry with no consistent year-on-year manufacturing requirement, what risk does the government take on versus what risk do contractors take on? And specifically, is there room for contractors to pay more into this modernization effort, or do we feel that given their current profit margins, we would drive them to discontinue supporting the effort?
So, well, thank you. That's a great business question. I've taken a look at some of the motivations for trying to drive vendors to put their own money into the facilities themselves. Generally, what that ends up happening is that they put money into the facilities, but it ends up on some of their calculation sheets later on, and I'm paying for it over longer term periods, so they justify a larger G&A or overhead rates, and I end up paying not just on that facility, but the rate gets justified across the industry. So, and I also find that I'm not sure that I see them investing effectively in the things that make a difference to me. They make a difference into their profit margins. So my view of this is, it's our facility. We should have a good plan. We should decide on what we want to invest in, and then this is the United States military's, Department of Defense's industrial base for munitions. We need to own that, not have anything beholden IP-wise or any other way to the defense industry or any other supplier.
But is there room to raise the rent on some of our contractors, or to, just because I'm just wondering, I just don't know enough about how much money they're making off these enterprises and how much the U.S. government is supporting that profit. And so do we need to take a look at what more some of our contractors could be doing to pay into the system? Because we've got a heavy burden to modernize these facilities.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I've begun looking at the contracting methodologies we're applying to these facilities. It's basically we keep buying and selling to ourselves. And we do that because we think that that's an easy way to manage the overall pricing structure. The problem with that is at the far end, we're always trying to push the price down, which means it cascades back down through the prices that are proposed to us by the industrial base or the contractors. And the end state of that is they're always trying to save money on their margins. We really can't see in it because we just bid prices at both ends. And the end state of that is the lawns don't get mowed, the fire departments don't get done right. So what we've begun to do is, starting with Radford, is take a specific look at the contracting methodologies we put in place there, and then follow, the old saying, follow the money. Who buys what materials, at what point? How does that fit into the contract? How do we need to modify the contract so the government gets a better position of that? I want industry to want to work with us, but what I don't want to do is have a blind eye towards the potential areas where they can make unexpected profits. When they finish a material, I want to make sure that I know where it's going, who's selling, who they're selling to, who they're buying from. In Lake City, for example, 50% of the facility's production capability is dedicated to commercial products because we have this surge capability, and that's part of the deal. I'm not sure that we're breaking even Steven on that. So we're doing an investigation to determine whether or not the government's fundamentally subsidizing commercial production or not. So it's a good question. I wish I could give you the concrete answer with footnotes, but we're in the middle of trying to determine it right now.
Oh, great. That's good to hear you're looking into it. And then when you were speaking earlier about some single source materials that we don't produce here, and we've chosen at this point to import them rather than produce them here. And when you said it was a regulatory issue, especially for some of our chemical materials, when you're talking regulatory, are those environmental regulations?
Yes, ma'am. The vast majority of them are environmental. In production of DNAN, you start with benzene. You go through several intermediate states. Some of those materials have a great deal of controls on these intermediate materials. We wouldn't leave them there, but just the fact that we produce them, you have to have a lot of environmental controls, which impacts the cost of the facility production. There are alternative methods of producing them, but then the price of the materials go up. So that's the challenge that we're dealing with, and then we try to compete against the price that's half the price if I buy it. And I think we need to make a hard determination as to what percent of our supply needs to be unquestionably domestic and what our surge capacity needs to be.
And then finally, as the Army seeks to modernize both the process and the facilities for producing munitions and the actual conventional munitions being produced, what is your vision for the development, and we've spoken a little bit, and manufacturing of the next generation 21st century small caliber munitions?
So the facility we would produce the small caliber, such as the 6.8, would be at Lake City. And it all depends on which direction we go. If we go the brass casing, we have some very modern production lines that are at Lake City. They are very high speed, very, very fast in production. We retool them and we can add additional lines for relatively small quantities, small expense. And that would be one direction if we have the brass case. If we don't, as part of their development effort, the two that are building the polymer cases are also building the technology to produce the polymer cases. And then that's part of this issue of us ensuring that we have a license to be able to use those technologies and have them help us establish our own production capability.
And final, just real quick, and what did you say the timeline was? The brass, you thought you could do that in what time frame versus the polymer in what time frame?
Brass is changing tooling, few months. Whereas if I wanted to get quickly into production, a few months on a production line, because I just have to retool and change jigs. If I'm going to the polymer casings, I'm going to have to build a new facility. But in the end, we expect to build a new facility in either case.
Ms. Sherrill, you finished? We'll have
Yield back.
another round, so if you want to hang on. I want to follow up with exactly what she's talking about. The single source you've identified as a major concern. The tooling we talked about. So the base material for across many of the lines has been there since the 40s. There are some new ones. So you lay that up against where it's coming from and the risk associated with it. So the question that I think of is stockpiling. Well, it sounds good, but there might be an expiration date, literally the amount that goes there, but that minimizes your single source, particularly if you can do quite a bit, just like our national oil reserves. Do you have faith in the materials that most at risk that you could build up a stockpile, or is there a reason why we cannot?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to share the answer here because I think General Daly can contribute as well. We do stockpile. We do stockpile precursor materials, and we do stockpile end-state items. To include materials that are of importance for us that are sourced from elsewhere. Right now, we believe we're probably in an acceptable mode for our ongoing consistent production. And some cases, there is enough material for some surge capacity. But if you have any sort of a protracted operation and you had your supply cut off, eventually you run out. So in the end, I believe that you really want to be able to have an alternative source, either an alternative product that does the same function, or an alternative source that's either domestic or within your ability to access in an operational environment.
So private industry in many ways steps up to the plate, but it's particularly difficult here, why we have our own. Have you been approached by some unique manufacturers on a single line of munitions that they think they can do better than you are? Or is it the uniqueness of what we're building that they're unable, within a price point, to come in?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take that question for the record. I don't believe anyone has ever come to us, but that doesn't mean I know about all potential approaches. But I'll come back to that. Given that I'm pretty confident that we haven't been approached there, the fundamental goes back to this hurdles. You have three hurdles at hand. One is capital investment that's necessary in order to make a facility that can actually meet all the EPA and other standards, safety and EPA standards, is expensive. The second one is these EPA standards so that we make sure that and operation so that we don't have pollution in these intermediate materials. And the third one is the fundamental cost of the material at the far end. I'm going to add one more. Liability. If I put that plant, these are explosives, if I put that plant in a place, I have to put that plant in a place where I have some indemnification from possible liability should the plant blow up. What we have actually begun taking a hard look at is whether or not we might solicit companies to use our land, much like we've done with the housing side of things. Mm-hmm. We've got the land, you get a long-term lease, we'll give you the lease, we'll indemnify you, you're on our facility. And oh, by the way, you build it and we'll buy from you, and here's our long-term plan. So we're looking at trying to do something like that. That starts eating away at a number of these issues, but I think we still have an issue associated with the capital investment at the front end to get into the business and the potential challenges of trying to meet all the EPA standards.
One last question for each of you. General, in what we're talking about today, pretty wide-ranging. What keeps you up at night? What is that one item?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question. I will tell you that our focus, based on the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army's priorities, 5 areas. And because we focus on them all the time, I don't know that I stay up at night thinking about them because we're giving it the right focus right now. The first is that we meet not only current but future ammunition requirements in support of the National Defense Strategy. The second is that we modernize appropriately. So all the things we talked about, plus multi-purpose facilities, et cetera. The third is that we protect our organic industrial base assets because they're vulnerable, as you mentioned. And the fourth has to do with reducing the single points of failure and the reliance on the 55 foreign suppliers that we can trace to at this point. And then the last is always focusing on our people and safety and the workforce of the future, as especially on the go-go side, the aging workforce. I think if we continue to focus on those 5 areas, we'll be successful for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Jetty.
Sure, mine's very similar to General Daley's. Fundamentally, I think we're meeting our obligations and are in a good position to meet any current needs and foreseeable surges. So that's not keeping me up at night. I do probably worry most about the safety aspects of our current facilities, primarily because I think that our current approach is to improve good safety within the facilities we have, but that's not what's possible. And what's possible, as I said earlier, 3 deaths in the last 10 years on our facilities. 2 of them were related to the manufacturing process. That's too many. Mm-hmm. And we don't need to have that circumstance happen anymore. So I do not want to be the ASALT and get a phone call that there's another death on something I could have provided an improvement to. From the national defense, I'm meeting the requirement. I've got it safely operating. I need to fill this hole called supply chain. I need us to not have a supply problem from anywhere outside the United States.
Thank you. Mrs. Hartz.
I appreciate your focus on safety of the people as being the most important thing as we look at the challenges and the providing ammunition to our warfighters. And want to mention my constituent Lawrence Bass, who lost his life there at Lake City in the explosion 3 years ago. And I'm excited about the modernization efforts and appreciative of it so that that doesn't happen in the future. But when that happened, talk about single point of failure, Lake City was shut down for many months as, first of all, accident reviews were underway, trying to figure out what happened and what could be done to avoid this in the future, and then rebuilding the explosive area. And just wanted you to expound a little bit on the contingency plans that you have. You say you've identified the single point of failure places in our industrial complex here, but what are the contingency plans? I know, if I remember right, from Lake City, we were able to call upon some industry, some private industry, to help backfill some of that material that's needed. But could you expand a little bit on the contingency plans you have in place?
Ranking Member Hartzler, so I'll defer to Dr. Jetty on the suppliers, but in terms of Lake City, in fact, I just visited Lake City last week, and so as you mentioned, a tragedy that occurred in April of 2017, and that was related, as you know, to mixing of tetrazine for primers. So the way forward is we relooked the way we manufacture the primers and have adjusted internal to the plant. And then getting at, as we modernize, making sure we have multi-purpose facilities so that every line can do different functions. So it's just not 5.56 millimeter on one line and 7.62 millimeter on a second line, but they're multi-purpose so that we have flexibility on an installation. And then, to Dr. Jetty's point, looking more holistically where we can get efficiencies and additional capability in other locations, not just in the organic industrial base, but with private industry.
Yes, ma'am. And I did. Lawrence Bass's death was tragic and should not have occurred. I'm not sure that given that we thought we were doing the right thing. He was performing duties in accordance with what the procedures were. The problem was the procedures didn't account for all possible outcomes. And so that's one of the reasons why, his death is, in fact, a catalyst to my insistence upon transforming our approach as opposed to modernizing under the current circumstances. He should never have been in that close proximity where that event could have happened, and should it have happened with a machine, I can buy another machine.
Yeah.
So while tragic, it has been a motivator. And I'm just totally in line with what General Daly said about this. From the aspect of, can we find commercial alternative sourcing for some of the manufacturing capabilities? It depends on where we are in the line as to whether or not that would be easily done in alternative facilities in the commercial sector. Munitions at manufacturing, bullet manufacturing. If they're basic bullets, then there are alternative sources within the United States that we could go to. If we start going to unique materials like explosive rounds, 30 millimeters, armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabos, not too much of that in the commercial sector, nor are there equipment set up to be able to handle that. That's why I've gone back to the program executive officer. We have a new program executive officer, and I specifically told him his job is find alternative sources worldwide that we have that can guarantee us to be able to produce these. If we need to establish a contract with another source, I was in a factory in Korea. They used to supply us basically 50 caliber and below. We stopped it. They have full capability to do so again, and that would give us a chance to ensure that they're meeting our quality standards and could then have a supply that's assured in Korea should something occur here, we can bring it, ship it from Korea to here. So that's probably the U.S., Canada, Mexico, then overseas. That's the order of sequence we've got going right now, where there are no alternative manufacturing facilities in the United States.
I think that's really smart, and I appreciate your efforts there. That makes a lot of sense. Speaking of Lake City again, I know that we are investing, there's 12 modernization projects there, and they're receiving quite a bit of funding. So can you walk me through some of the facility modernization projects that are going on there? Great.
Sorry, I haven't memorized them all.
It's a big book.
Lake City. So we've got primer component wash system update. It's a $2.8 million effort. In that facility, when you create the primer, you have to rinse out some of the chemicals and then recover the primer material itself from that. So you have to. So this is a facility upgrade so that we can recover more of the primer material and decrease our output pollution.
Okay.
556 clip line upgrade, which is $7.7 million. If you have 556 in a clip so that it can, we can feed it through a machine gun, we have to have all those clips produced and then be able to snap them together in an automated fashion. So that it's just an enhancement to the current facility. Safe pack unload, 2.5. This again is just an upgrade to the 556 production capability at that facility. $8.45 million. By the way, the 556 is tremendously interesting to watch the machines, and if any of the committee members would like to go out, I like to extend an invitation to come to any of these facilities and see what we're talking about. There are two lines at Lake City that are really interesting. They happen to be, I'm not sure if they're 556 or they're 762, but one line is literally the one that produced with the machines from World War II. It's still functioning today. That is a big factory that produces a quantity of them. In the other facility, we have several lines that produce the equal round today on a totally different production capability. Those lines, one line produces what that other building produces in a day. So the technology difference in what we have an opportunity to do is tremendous. That's why improving our 556. I have to tell you, I don't know what an ADVAP facility upgrade is, but I will find out for you. Neutralization upgrades. I'm just going to go down this and make sure that I give you the more detailed answers.
Well, yeah, why don't you just get back with me? I know we're time with our other members and stuff, but I sure appreciate it. Thank you. And I have another question if we'll have time at the end, but I yield back. Thank you. I'm sorry. Yes, I'll ask my last question. General Daly, in the written testimony, you talk about the 2019 Single Manager of Conventional Ammunition annual report and the performance measures, and I found this very fascinating. As far as the acceptance test, 99.4% pass frequency, which is important. If you get a bullet, you want to make sure it's going to work. 99.6% as far as inventory accuracy count, physical inventory, so what's actually there versus what's in the inventory. I mean, that's amazing. 98.6% of the orders filled, perfect orders for distribution management category. The one that I was curious about, though, is acquisition management category, where it was only 84% on-time rate, and that deals with delivery dates. So why do we have a discrepancy there in our delivery dates being only on-time 84%?
So, Ranking Member Hartzler, so 3 of the 4, as you mentioned already, Dr. Jetty, I don't know if you want to take this piece on acquisition management, because the metric is associated with suppliers to the organic industrial base. And the timeliness for them to supply to support production and manufacturing, so.
Okay.
And again, the 2020 report is forthcoming, and quite frankly, we're going to fall short again on acquisition management.
Yes, ma'am. So there are two pieces that I'm trying to get a better handle on. One of them is a supplier delivery schedule. It appears that the delivery schedule, even with COVID, we were pretty good at keeping up with the delivery schedule or compensating with our current on-hand stocks. Another thing that contributes to that and our late deliveries is late arrival of money. And so if I get an order from the Air Force and I don't get the money until a little bit later, it slows down the process, but they usually tie their delivery date to the order date, not the delivery date to the funding date. So,
So is that a function of Congress? Is it because of us? We're late in getting approval of the budget, and so that's why there's no money? Or is it just a problem within the Air Force or some other Pentagon function that they're not sending the money out?
so I think, so this was an interesting, great question. So I went back to the staff when I rooted this out, and I said, well, you know, why are we waiting? Don't we have investment? And I started thinking about it. This is an acquisition, so it's a procurement action. Well, I can't spend procurement dollars until I have the procurement dollars. But that's not the case in all cases for how we manage all things. So, for example, General Daly has an AQUA, a working capital fund. So he knows he's going to have demand of a certain type. He just doesn't know exactly when the date is going to occur. So he can expend some of his working capital fund in order to procure items that have long lead times prior to the order coming in and the funding coming in. It smooths things out. And I said, why don't we have a working capital fund for munitions? And the answer I got back was, well, we used to, and there were some problems with how it was managed, and so we got rid of it. And so I have told my staff, and I've asked General Daly to help, since he does manage effectively a working capital fund. I think that we need to revisit that as to whether or not to reestablish a working capital fund, put in enough funding to level out these shortcomings as funding and orders flow on different dates. And I think that may have a significant improvement to our late delivery schedules. Whenever somebody tells me that you cancel something because somebody mismanaged it, then fix the mismanagement. Don't eliminate the methodology. That's what I think we were trying to do.
Sounds good.
Ma'am, if I could, so Dr. Jetty and I are 100% synced on this, and I think what we've had is a self-constrained firewall between GoCos and GoGos. And what we're pledging going forward is this comprehensive approach where maybe some of the things we're doing in the GoCos could be used at the GoCo level and vice versa. And this gets at the efficiencies to really go after modernization for the future. So,
Sounds good. Thank you. Go back.
Well, I didn't hear anybody take you up on watching the Bullet Machine, but how it's made is one of the best shows on TV. Just the ingenuity of engineers and builders in this great country. 1940, your buildings are still working, maybe not as efficient, but they know how to do it. I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming by today. There's a couple items we'll follow up with, but we are adjourned.